AIDS. More than 33 million people worldwide live with HIV/AIDS. 7,000 more become infected daily. And 5,000 people die every day of AIDS. Dr. Mark Wainberg made one of the first landmark discoveries in AIDS treatment. And he's gone on to become an international leader in the fight against AIDS. 1981. Reports begin surfacing of a mysterious illness, one that leads to a painful and certain death.
There was huge fear, huge uncertainty. People didn't want anything to do with it. I had colleagues who didn't want to have anything to do with it and so on.
Physician Norbert Gilmore was on the front lines in Montreal in the early 1980s when patients suffering from severe weight loss, lung and brain infections, and rare cancers began dying in growing numbers.
Meanwhile, the healthcare providers were just getting overwhelmed by this volume of people. At one point at the Royal Victoria Hospital, we had over 20 patients in the hospital. It's a huge number, considering 5 years earlier, there were none of those people.
It is more than a horror story exploited by the tabloids.
It was AIDS, autoimmune deficiency syndrome. AIDS attacked the gay community first, and that fact made this disease a target of fear and discrimination.
It was all nonsense. It had nothing to do with reality, but people's worst fears and emotions came to the fore. And I remember it was really panic days. And what's the next step after we get these data?
Many in the healthcare field wanted nothing to do with AIDS, but Mark Wainberg knew he could not turn away. His training had prepared him for exactly this kind of medical mystery. Wainberg was a molecular biologist who had worked in the U.S. with Robert Gallo, the man who would later co-discover HIV, the virus causing AIDS. In 1984, after Wainberg returned to Montreal, Gallo provided him with cells, antibodies, and other material needed to grow the newly identified human immunodeficiency virus, or HIV, in a controlled setting. Wainberg became the first researcher in Canada to put HIV under the microscope. Meanwhile, AIDS was making its way around the globe, claiming more and more victims. By 1985, 1.5 million people worldwide had become infected. That number would skyrocket over the next decade, while scientists struggled to find life-saving treatment. In 1987, AZT became the first antiretroviral drug to slow the disease's progression. But 18 months into treatment, AZT's effectiveness began to wane, and its painful side effects took their toll on patients. Finally, in 1989, a major breakthrough. McGill chemist Bernard Bello, who co-founded Biochem Pharma, synthesized the compound 3TC. He then turned to Mark Wainberg to conduct studies to determine if 3TC would be effective in combating HIV. It was.
First and foremost, we have to give credit to chemists. It's really always the chemists who design drugs and come up with chemical structures that are novel and that are going to work. And it's people like myself who get to test the concepts.
3TC gave renewed hope when used in combination with AZT and later in a tri-cocktail of medications.
The AZT-3TC combo was a huge one. It gave us a lot of encouragement, I think, that we might be able to get around the corner. It in itself was not sufficient, but add the third drug in, and everybody's galloping along now.
In those early years, Mark Wainberg was only one of a few people in Canada who knew anything about AIDS, so he became an important source for the media.
It didn't make sense to not try to answer, and it also didn't make sense to pretend that there wasn't an important social dimension. After all, we cannot hide the fact that HIV is a sexually transmitted infectious entity, and we should not ever want to hide that fact, because the key to prevention is by being honest with people and educating them.
The bill in Congress to find a cure for AIDS.
Because of the discrimination, the misinformation, the ignorance, Wainberg became more than an AIDS researcher. He became an AIDS activist.
It is time to deliver drugs and hope and prevention measures to the people on our...
If governments had listened when scientists were raising the alarm bells in regard to the HIV epidemic going back 20 years, we would probably today have a much reduced epidemic compared to the worldwide disaster and problem that we continue to confront. Maybe the problem is that not enough scientists want to consider careers in politics, and I think that's really not a trivial point.
Wainberg's profile in the AIDS movement grew internationally. He was elected president of the International AIDS Society from 1998 to 2000, when the AIDS crisis hit a critical juncture. In the West, HIV/AIDS patients had easy access to life-saving drugs and were living with basically a chronic disease. But in the developing world, AIDS remained a death sentence.
In the year 2000, only 7,000 individuals on the entire African continent, despite the fact that millions were infected, had access to these life-saving drugs.
Wainberg pushed hard to have the International AIDS Conference held in Durban, South Africa in 2000 to draw world attention to the AIDS epidemic that was decimating the continent.
The role of Prime Minister includes the responsibility to show leadership.
In 2006, he chaired the International AIDS Conference held in Toronto, repeatedly inviting Prime Minister Stephen Harper to attend.
Your absence sends a message that you do not regard HIV/AIDS as a critical priority. And clearly, all of us here tonight disagree with you.
The Prime Minister didn't show. And Mark just stood up there and says, "Why aren't you here? You should be here." And so he just really let it go.
We have to get our governments, no matter what their political stripe, to understand that money invested in research is going to pay long-term dividends for all Canadians.
Mark Wainberg is the rare breed of researcher-activist who has made profound contributions at both the scientific and community levels.
I'd like to think that the knowledge that our work here has made a difference in the lives of millions of people infected by HIV is extremely gratifying. You know, I don't think there's any doubt the work that we have done in our lab at the Jewish General and McGill has enabled many millions of people to live longer and better lives than would otherwise be the case, and that's extremely gratifying.